Are you sure you won't get infected with the medieval plague, the one that took the lives of tens of millions at once? Of course, a plague doctor in a mask with an intimidating beak, an image so loved by filmmakers, will not come today. Your house won't be painted with a red cross, a sign of infection. It's so wonderful that we live in the 21st century and that this isn't going to happen to us, we can say and sigh with relief. If this is what you're thinking, you would be totally wrong. 4 cases of infection from this deadly and highly infectious disease were reported in China in November 2019, shocking the entire world. But how did this eerie ghost of the past creep into our time when you're only one phone call away from qualified medical care? Is it possible to protect yourself somehow against the disease? The sad truth is that the plague didn't vanish. Although it's no longer widespread as in the Middle Ages, about 2,500 people become infected every year, and 5 to 10% of them die as a result. A pretty large number of such cases occur in China, Madagascar, Congo, and Peru. 2 unlucky people this time were residents of sparsely populated Selingal, an autonomous region of the Inner Mongolia region in northern China. It began when, in early November, a husband and wife sought medical help at a hospital in the CHAOYANG district in Beijing, where they were diagnosed with pulmonary plague. Of course, this clinical form of the disease has a more acute course compared to bubonic plague, and often ends in death. In both cases, the causative agent is the bacterium Yersinia pestis, which can be found in the body of small mammals and in the fleas that live on the animals. Bubonic plague is more common. In this case, Yersinia pestis enters the body at the site of a bite from an infected flea and moves through the lymphatic system to the nearest lymph node, where it begins to multiply, causing inflammation. The infected lymph node swells and becomes painful, turning into the so-called bubo that looks like a huge corn. In the later stages, such nodes can become open, pus-filled wounds. Interestingly, bubonic plague is rarely transmitted from person to person. In later stages of the disease, the infection can reach the lungs, and pulmonary plague will occur. It was the pulmonary form that was identified in the couple in China. At first, they were treated in a regional hospital, but there was no improvement. By the time they got to Dr. Li Jifeng in Beijing, the man had experienced breathing problems and a fever for 10 days. His wife was showing the same symptoms. Despite many years of experience in the diagnosis and treatment of respiratory diseases, Dr. Li was not able to detect the pathogen at fault here, but it was clear that it was very rare. In addition, the signs of any infectious disease must be rechecked. During laboratory testing, one of the diagnostic methods reveals the specific antigen Yersinia pestis in a sample of the bubo, blood, or phlegm. As soon as the patients were diagnosed with pulmonary plague, the victims, along with the entire emergency department, were quarantined. Epidemiological investigations and disinfection were carried out. However, the slow reaction of the authorities, who didn't immediately recognize the seriousness of the problem, provoked a storm of anger among local residents. However, no less fear was caused by the lack of transparency than by the plague itself. All news outlets were censored to block and control online discussions related to the plague. Dr. Li's post on a social network describing the case was also deleted. How many people did the infected couple come into contact with on their way to Beijing? One of the users of the Weibo microblogging service wondered. then stated, "I'm trembling." The Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention of Diseases claimed that there was no reason to panic, and the risk of further spread of the disease was extremely low. A few days later, a third case of pulmonary plague was recorded in Inner Mongolia. According to official sources, it wasn't connected to the previous ones. The 55-year-old man contracted the bubonic plague, presumably after eating wild rabbit meat. The victim, unlike the first two, was admitted to the hospital in critical condition. He and 28 other people with whom the man had been in close contact were quarantined. According to the commission, the 28 people that the patient was in contact with didn't show any pathological symptoms. It didn't take long for the fourth case in the same month to be detected. This time, a shepherd from the ULANQAB region of Inner Mongolia was diagnosed. He's undergoing treatment now, and 4 people who came into contact with him have been placed under observation. Fortunately, everything has been limited to these cases and locally isolated for now. A different situation was observed earlier in the Gansu province in 2014. Then, 30,000 residents of Yumen City were quarantined after a 38-year-old resident contracted the bubonic plague from a wild groundhog and died. Infections in Inner Mongolia are associated with an increase in rodent populations due to persistent droughts worsened by climate change. According to the Xinhua news agency, a territory the size of the Netherlands was hit by a rat plague last summer, resulting in damage of 600 million yuan, or $86 million. So is it possible to eradicate it once and for all? Given that the causes of the plague are known, plague is a natural focal disease, similar to tick-borne encephalitis. Arthropods, mammals, and any human who enters the infectious system are all involved in maintaining the disease's foci. Accordingly, to get rid of the plague, one would have to exterminate all mammals and arthropods carrying the disease, which, of course, is impossible. The breeding rate and incredible adaptability of rats makes the reservoir of bacteria simply inexhaustible. Fleas carry bacteria from one rodent to another. It's believed that the Black Death began with fleas that passed from dead rats to humans, infecting them. This is also how the plague spreads today. The disease can be defeated, though. In ancient times, they fought the disease in their own way, although much less efficiently. They isolated the patients, subjected them to bloodletting, thereby weakening them even more, placed saucers around them with milk in an attempt to attract the disease, and burned the bodies of the dead. Today, early diagnosis and antibiotics, coupled with treatment, are saving us from the plague. However, bacteria also develop resistance to the antibiotics over time, so scientists are looking for alternatives. Alexander Yersin used the serum layer of blood drawn from horses as an antitoxin, and Waldemar Hafkeen developed a vaccine from a weakened strain. But it protects only against bubonic plague and is powerless against the pulmonary form of the disease. Also, despite the fact that our immune system is generally not capable of defeating the plague on its own, there are known cases of self-healing. There's an assumption that some people are genetically resistant to the disease. However, it should be noted that the current genome of the plague bacillus is different from what it was originally. According to a study by German scientists, in the midst of the Black Death in the mid-14th century, the plague's genetic code was identical for victims from St. Laurent, Barcelona, London, and Oslo. Then the bacterium evolved and lost the part of its DNA, giving the ability to cause an infectious disease, and the plague epidemic subsided. Later European outbreaks of the 15th to 18th centuries were provoked by another genetic variety of the bacillus, which came from an earlier form. Of course, it's always better to prevent a disease than to have to treat it. To avoid getting infected, you need to protect yourself from flea bites. Don't touch the corpses of dead animals, and avoid direct interaction with infected or potentially infected biological fluids and tissues. So, in the years since the first outbreak of the plague, people invented antibiotics, learned how to grow artificial organs, made many more incredible discoveries, but still didn't overcome this scourge. Perhaps this is how nature reminds us that we are part of it and must adapt to it, rather than try to adapt nature to ourselves. How protected from the plague do you feel? If you liked the video, give us a quick thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, click on the bell to enable notifications of new videos, and don't forget to recommend us to your friends. Until next time.